this is Rick Cassalge from exercisesforinjuries.com. Today I have another interview for you, and it's with Mike Gillette. And I'll get Mike to introduce himself, and then we'll get into the interview. Okay, Mike, I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Awesome to be with you and to have a chance to talk to your listeners. I think I would best be described as a perpetual strength seeker. It's something that's been with me as I've kind of evolved through different career fields in my life, different periods of my life. It's just kind of been the constant in the background, trying to find ways to improve myself physically and mentally.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, looking at the strength side of things, like kind of what prompted you to get into strength training?
Well, strength was something for me. You know, when I was very young, I was a non-physical person, probably an extreme example of that. So it was always something, you know, being strong, being capable was something that seemed kind of exotic and mysterious to me when I was a young person. And then when I decided to pursue being a physical person, this was 19 or so years old, and I was looking at joining the military. I knew that it would be sort of a vocational imperative to become a physical person, even though at the time I really didn't know quite yet what that would entail or what that meant. I knew that it was coming, and I knew that I would have to start preparing myself in some fashion. So with a rudimentary approach, I began doing a lot of calisthenics. I started running because I had seen movies of guys in the Army, and they seem to run a lot. They seem to do a lot of push-ups. So I thought, well, why not do some of that? Once I was actually in basic training, once I was on active duty, things became a lot more sophisticated in terms of how I was trying to accomplish things. And I basically wanted to be the best soldier that I could. So that did still mean a lot of running. I was at Fort Bragg in the 2nd Airborne Division. I also swam quite a bit in those days. And I also lifted weights, but that was in using the Nautilus system, using the old Arthur Jones Nautilus machines. And it's a classic Nautilus gym setup, so you had to go in the order prescribed. You could only do the Arthur Jones protocol of like one set per machine, and if the guy who was running the gym saw you deviating from that, it would be banned from the Nautilus machines.
Oh my gosh.
And Arthur Jones had done a very good job of creating this sense that if you use these exercise machines wrong, because that's all they were exercise machines, like, something mysterious and dangerous might happen to you. So that was pretty good marketing. I thought the machines were cool. They were still, considered relatively exotic at that time frame. So for me, it was a question of wanting to do well in my chosen job at the time. And also, it was a very competitive environment. Fort Bragg, North Carolina is home to the 82nd Airborne Division, Special Forces training. It was also home base to 7th Special Forces Group, 5th Special Forces Group, and a mysterious military unit that doesn't actually exist, but everyone knows it exists, referred to as Delta Force or the unit. They were there too. So the vibe at Fort Bragg was very intense. And I was young, and I was absolutely in it, loved it, and wanted to do whatever I could to, be a competitive guy in that universe. To be a legit paratrooper. Basically to be a badass. That's what I was looking for.
Cool. Now, so we talked about, so that kind of led you into kind of the strength side of things. Now, you've kind of taken that to a new level. So, like, what kind of led to you focusing on the, like, superior physical strength and, like, the superior mental toughness and kind of trying the things that most people wouldn't try, like bending rebar on their heads?
My proclivities have only seemed sort of extreme really in the last few years, maybe, I think since '08, when I started doing some of the things that you were alluding to. But really, the foundational mentality was there going back to that military time. Military time is where I learned that I could be tough. I could be physically tough by cultivating mental toughness. And I didn't really have a sophisticated process for doing that at the time. All I knew to do was to keep going, was to push myself further. And because I was doing okay when I got to Fort Bragg. I was getting perfect scores on my PT tests at the time, but in Fort Bragg, that wasn't considered a big deal. That was kind of expected. So I immediately had to kind of adjust to, wow, these guys are kind of next level. So I just pushed myself really hard. And then it was shortly after I left active duty. I was intending to continue on active duty after college, but I came to the end of my enlistment, qualified for an OTC scholarship. My intention at the time was to go to college, get my degree, go back on active duty as an officer. So basically, that's how you make the transition from being a fry cook to an assistant manager. You're trying to make that supervisory leap. So my first semester at college, University of Arizona, 1984, I was in a climbing accident, got all smashed up. So much so, broke my back, my ankles, and was medically processed out of the military. There was no possible way at that time that my orthopedic surgeon said I could ever reasonably consider pursuing that kind of stuff. I would never run again, never jump out of airplanes, and so on and so on. And my mental toughness really, whatever it was that I was doing to have it, to make it real for myself, was really called upon in those years, because it was about 4.5 years of going from a guy who was navigating in a wheelchair to a walker to those crutches that wrap around your arms, because I was in this huge brace for my back, and I'm trying to navigate around campus and figure out what I'm going to do with my life. I was married and we had a baby at the time, and all I knew is that I didn't want to be anything other than the kind of person I had forged myself into, or at least started to forge myself into when I was in the military. And so I just kept, trying to chase that, even though it hurt a lot and there were many setbacks and frustrations. So the mental toughness thing really was a long evolutionary process for me, but it wasn't a formalized process. It was just something I did. And I think that most people who we look at and say, oh, that girl, she's mentally tough, that guy, he's mentally tough, are people who don't necessarily have a system in place. They just somehow make themselves do it. They can somehow push through all kinds of things. And that's one way to do it. I guess I would refer to that as sort of the experiential model. It's like you align yourself with a guy who used to be Navy SEAL because you want to become mentally tough like he ostensibly was. But the only thing he knows how to do is duplicate that experience. So, that's not necessarily going to work for everybody. We don't have the luxury of time, of the wear and tear, of mimicking certain things, which if you survive them, congratulations, I suppose you're mentally tough now. There are other ways of doing it. And so fast forward, I'm eventually physically better to the point where I can reasonably consider pursuing law enforcement, which is what I was going for before I went into the Army. That was just to get money for college, so I could ultimately pursue that. So I was physical again. I got myself over many hurdles, and all of that was great. But as I entered that particular profession, Rick, I found myself getting involved in training quite a bit right away. I was a pretty young cop to get plugged into some of the training assignments I was given. I found that I really liked training, seemed to have an aptitude for it. But what I found was in the spectrum of skills that law enforcement personnel, and this will be relevant, what law enforcement personnel are trained in, whether it's using their expandable batons, or their pepper spray, or their bare hands, or firearms. So much of the way that those particular tools were taught was kind of sterile. It was kind of in a classroom vacuum sort of context, because it's easy to manage training in that fashion. It's easy to make training safe in that fashion. But those conditions did not replicate the world in which police officers had to actually function, which is why police officers sometimes get jammed up and either under-respond in certain circumstances or over-respond in certain circumstances, because their training never really put them in situations that could replicate the stress and the confusion, the darkness, the fatigue, all of these different variables. So once I kind of had that realization, I started looking for all kinds of ways to insert those variables into the training that I was doing for others, and of course, my own training. So that was really when I started to look at kind of the behavioral science variable of even physical task training. So that can be applied to physical training. I mean, look at what people are doing now, Rick, with some of these obstacle races. That's kind of an interesting, I mean, it's fun and it's recreational, but at the same time, you're taking physical tasks and you're putting them into an environmental context, or a long durational context. So, yeah, I can, jump over hurdles, or I can climb over this or that, but can I do that after I've run 3 miles and I've just fireman carried, like 3 different guys, and we've crawled through the mud, and I think I drank some of that water, and I've got a stomach ache, but at the race isn't over, all of these kinds of problems. And for me, it was, the sort of ongoing search for, how do I make things more challenging? How do I make myself better? How do I make other people better? And really looking at different ways, different techniques. So I had a lot of time I spent in martial arts, and there was some of that to be gleaned from the martial arts. There were things that I was learning because I was studying skills like hypnosis or neuro-linguistic programming, really because I was trying to see if there were things there that might be applicable to the people that I was training. And the intent to sort of create the most idealized version of myself, because I figured if I knew how to crack that code, then I could take that and apply it to other people. Because like all through the 90s and the early 2000s, I was training hundreds and then thousands of different people, mostly in high-risk professions. After the events of 9/11, I was training a lot of people who were learning new skills simply because of the jobs they had. So I worked extensively with the airline industry. I worked with people in the hospitality industry, theme parks, and so forth, what we might refer to as soft targets. And yes, there were the technical skills components associated with all of those audiences, but moreover, there was the sort of the behavioral filter that all of that information would have to be processed through in order for you to bring those skills to bear in real time in the real world. So it was a long time coming, this kind of pursuit of, how do I make the best Mike Gillette, so that once I've learned how to do that, I can make the best everyone else that I come in contact with in my role as an instructor. And that ultimately takes us to the last part of your question, which was when I started doing things that look a little bit extreme. In 2008, I went on sort of a fact-finding field trip to a multi-day workshop that a gentleman named Dennis Rogers was putting on. Dennis Rogers, probably the best known of the performing strongman. This is a gentleman who's been on Oprah, Letterman, Regis, and Kathy Lee. That's how far back that goes. But he's done TV, he's traveled the world, and He was the first human to fold a crescent wrench in half. I believe he was the first person to S-bend a crescent wrench, which means in thirds. Um, let your listeners wrap their heads around that for a moment. But the thing that was most compelling to me about Dennis is, he was older than me, and he was even a little bit smaller than me. I'm an average sized guy, 5'9", 180 something, depending on what day of the week it is. But Dennis was even a little bit smaller, and he was doing stuff that was just off the charts difficult. And what I wanted to know is how a guy could do the things he did and not have his body just sort of disintegrate under the unique stresses that had to be present while doing those things. So we had talked. He invited me to this workshop because he had some of his other students from all over the U.S. and even internationally. So I was going there basically to get in their face and say, how on earth do you do what you do? Because all of these guys had some sort of unique specialties, all of which were just mind-boggling to me. And I never had any inkling that I might one day be able to hang with those guys as somebody who could do some of those same things too. It just seemed way beyond. I mean, I've been pretty fortunate over the years, physically speaking, being able to stay healthy enough to train fairly hard. But what these guys were doing was it was whole next level stuff. But once I was this close to them, I saw what they did from up close, and it was so alluring to me that I became obsessed with it, and then I started chasing it obsessively myself. And that's where all of that really came, and continues. I mean, I was 46 when I was exposed to that. I'm 54 now, and even having just been released to train following bicep surgery on my left arm 2.5 weeks ago, 1 week ago, I was doing a presentation at a school where I was doing these Mike Gillette sorts of things. So it's those for me are really a means to calibrate myself. I trained with a famous martial artist once who said something that really resonated with me, which was, you either know what you can do or you just think you know. And if you don't test yourself, hey, you just think you know, but you don't know. And he was an impressive guy who could do some really impressive things, and that really stuck with me. So I want to be somebody who always knows what he can do. And even, obviously I'm not getting younger, so some of those abilities are going to change over time. But I'm always going to be looking for ways to, keep myself as challenged as I reasonably can for as long as I can, because for me that is it's not only worthwhile and satisfying personally, it is a means of sort of validating what I allege to other people that I do. If I'm putting myself forward as somebody who can take a person from where they are to a higher place, particularly in the mental realm, then it's incumbent on me to stay active, really to be legitimate. That's just kind of what I expect of myself. I expect you, if I'm coming to you to solve, some rehab questions for me, I don't expect you to have stopped studying this stuff 20 years ago. I expect you to be conversant in, current best practices, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to stay conversant in my own conception of best practices are in this realm.